Everyone talks about authenticity. We celebrate it, we post about it, we encourage it for sure, right? But we rarely talk about what it actually demands. And no one really tells you what it actually looks like. And I'm still learning what authentic leadership really requires. I'm working on it, and I hope that this can serve as a conversation that we can have together. Because first, authenticity, it's hard, not because people are fake. And I remember growing up, my youngest brother, I'd be like threatening his life, and then the phone would ring and I would pick it up and be like, hello. And he would just always say like, you are so fake. But what I really believe about people is that none of us are really trying to, most of us at least, are not trying to deceive other people, right? We're not waking up thinking like, how do I manipulate this situation? How do I become someone I'm not? If anything, I think more of us want to feel like, how do I show more of who I really am? And usually what happens is when we're a little bit misaligned or we're coming off fake, it's because we're trying to belong. We want to be accepted. We want to do well or avoid unnecessary conflict. So if you're like me and you struggle with authenticity, it's not usually because, again, you're dishonest. It just comes from this place of self-protection. And it's hard because most of us were never really taught how to live from the inside out. And what does that mean? Well, knowing what you believe before you're pressured, deciding what your values are before you're tested, right? Having that internal compass, because most of us were taught the opposite, which was read the room, don't rock the boat, be agreeable, be nice, adjust to the expectations. And what that does is it trains us to respond outwardly first, right? Then think about how we feel later, if at all. And modern life for sure, right, rewards those external cues, right? Those likes on social media, the approval, the titles, the feedback, the public perception. So our decisions get made based on how will this be received? Who might we upset if we make this decision? What could be lost if we go down this path? And over time, we stop asking, is this true for me? And somewhere along the way, authenticity got twisted into oversharing. Like, if I'm authentic, I have to reveal everything. And I've recently seen this with an individual I follow that their belief is, I'm just going to tell you, say it how it is, right? But that walks a fine line between authenticity and annoying, and also if I'm authentic and I have to reveal everything, well, that's terrifying, especially if you're any kind of introvert, but being authentic and practicing honesty isn't a license to go and behave without filters. So just know that right at the gate. And next, to add to this misconception of being overbearingly transparent, authenticity feels harder today because social media has really turned life into this stage, right? So it's only natural that we would fear judgment, being misunderstood, being rejected, worrying about hurting feelings or rocking the boat. And like I said earlier, if you're an introvert at all, actually being seen, oh my gosh, no introvert wants the highlight on them. Please look over there to somebody else. But here's the thing, leaders can't afford to be inauthentic because when we are, the first casualty is trust. So the question we really have to ask ourselves is, are we willing to step past where it feels scary and be authentic anyway? Again, real authenticity isn't about telling everyone everything. It's more about alignment, about matching your values, your words, and your actions. Because authenticity, guess what? As you may already know, and if you haven't, you'll find out soon. It's not tested when things are easy. It's tested when decisions cost you, when people depend on you, when being liked and doing what's right are no longer the same thing. And that's where real leaders start asking themselves harder questions like, do I really know what I stand for? Am I willing to pay the price for my principles when it matters? How transparent is too transparent? How do I show vulnerability without losing authority? And how do I stay true to my values when the stakes are high? So first, let's just quickly review 4 defining characteristics of an authentic leader according to the Center for Creative Leadership. I'll put this information in the show notes. But first is self-awareness, right? Having clarity about your values, your priorities, the things that really enable you to understand yourself and your relationship with others. Next, you've got to look at genuineness, modesty, and humility, right? This allows you to share the glory with team members. I love leaders who are this way. They are unafraid to hire people smarter than them, to listen to others, and to be willing to not be the smartest voice in the room. That shows so much humility, right? To say, hey, I might not have all the answers. I may have more years of experience in this realm, but you're coming to this with a fresh set of eyes. Let me listen to you. And what tends to happen is as we grow in leadership, we kind of start to, believe our own hype, right? We really do think, well, nobody knows more than me. So really reining yourself into keeping that level of modesty and humility, it's a beautiful leadership attribute. And next, we would look at empathy and ethics, right? This gives you the ability to make those necessary decisions with integrity. It helps you stay committed to doing what's right for the long term. And finally, the 4th characteristic of an authentic leader is being results focused, right? It enables you to energize others to see the vision as clearly as you do. And next, as with all great attributes, authenticity comes with some requirements, and probably the greatest of them is courage. Courage isn't trendy. Being authentic means that you're going to risk disapproval, misunderstanding, losing status. And it really necessitates the courage to be disliked. If you've ever read that book, it's Japanese writers, Fumitaki Koga and Ichiro Kishimi. I hope I said that right, but really great book, literally called The Courage to Be Disliked. It also invites us to stop and on more than one occasion really ask ourselves, what do I actually believe? Where do I stand even if it costs me? And that internal compass is going to guide us in those moments of decisions, from values, from accountability beyond just ourselves, but to things like faith, moral tradition, mentors, community, principles that outlast trends. And I think King Solomon is a really great example of authentic leadership when we look at these traits. His leadership flowed from this internal compass rather than public approval. I think this is why his leadership still resonates thousands of years later, because when Solomon became king, he was young and he was untested. And give him a chance to ask for anything. Imagine, you can ask for anything. Power, wealth, victory, acclaim, all of those things, right? He asked for the wisdom to govern well, saying in Kings 1:3-9, "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people?" Wow, just lovely, beautiful, right? This matters because authentic leadership begins with, what do I need to serve this responsibility well, to wear this mantle with honor, right? Not what will make me impressive, what will gain likes, right? If King Solomon lived in our day, right? What will help me go viral? And let's look at another leader, whether you liked him or not, but people still have discussions about, not because he was warm or even universally loved, and you know him well, and that's Steve Jobs. Some people admired him, some people were frustrated by him, but almost no one walked away confused about what he stood for. And I think that's the point, right? We've been sold this idea that authentic leadership means being relatable and open and agreeable, maybe even a little bit vulnerable on cue. But Steve Jobs broke that model entirely, right? He wasn't known for consensus building. He wasn't trying to be liked. And yet people trusted him with the future of Apple, with $1 billion bets, with decisions that reshaped, entire industries. So the question is, why did people trust him? Well, he was authentic because he had an unusually clear internal compass. He knew what mattered, and that was excellence over average. He obsessed over quality and the way that things were done, honoring the craft over speed. Where in our day it's so much about who gets there first. He much rather would get there later if it meant arriving with quality and excellence. And I think what you can most respect about him was that he didn't adjust those values depending on who was in the room. He was the same person in the design reviews, in the boardroom, his keynotes on stage. That was very evident even in the way he appeared and dressed. He wasn't putting on airs. He was just, this is who I am. And that consistency, I understand, probably is what made him hard to work for at times, but for sure easy to understand. People could predict him, right? And predictability, I think, is a quiet form of trust. I spoke about this in a previous episode, where I referenced Tom Brady. You learn to trust someone that you can rely on. And if you contrast that with what we see today, a lot of leaders are performing authenticity, right? They write their values on their website. Maybe they show a little vulnerability on LinkedIn or empathy when it's convenient, but then decisions tell a different story. And that's where the trust breaks, right? Steve Jobs, he really led with alignment. He was very true to the values of the company around what he valued and what he set as the standard. And this kind of authenticity comes at a cost, right? Steve Jobs really paid for it. You'll remember he was fired from Apple. His style cost him relationships. He was often misunderstood. But when he returned to Apple didn't ask him to soften his standards. They needed them, right? Because authenticity that survives failure is authenticity rooted in principle, right? That's not ego, which I get most people probably think he was an egomaniac. Maybe there was some level to that, but I think more than anything, it was just rooted in his values and in his principles. If you're a leader listening to this in business, in family, in your community, let's ask ourselves a couple questions here. Are my values clear enough that people can predict my decisions? Do I act the same when it costs me? Would someone describe me as reliable, in character, not just inspiring in words? Chris Do is another leader that I look at. He's a mega branding expert. He's, a teacher, really. And I think what makes Chris so interesting isn't that everyone agrees with him, right? It's that he refuses to betray what he believes, even when it costs him followers, or clients, maybe even comfort. So you've got this world full of really loud opinions, and that's kind of what we think about when we think about authenticity. We think about going louder and being more true to who we are, just saying it how it is. But I think Chris goes the complete opposite. And that's kind of what I really like about him is he's not performing. He's teaching principles. And you'll see that he does it the same way, whether he's on YouTube, on stage, in his client conversations. He's very centered on his values, where creative work is valuable beyond just your time. His pricing is a leadership decision. He says that, saying no is an act of respect. And he tells creatives to stop discounting. Well, he's doing the same thing, right? He's not telling them to do something he wouldn't do. He's being authentic to exactly what he would do. When he tells people to hold boundaries, he holds them himself. And when he teaches self-respect, well, it shows up in the way that he works. And that alignment is, I believe, why people trust him, not because he's, perfect and he gets the job right every single time, But again, he's consistent. People have come to know what they can expect when they work with him. And here's the thing. Most leaders will soften their message to kind of keep momentum going. But Chris kind of does the opposite. If something contradicts his principles, he'll say it. Even if it's pushing back in the comments, even if the algorithm doesn't reward him, even if there's awkward silence in the room, he'll call it out, and that's authenticity, right? It's not necessarily being agreeable, saying yes to all things, but it's really just being anchored in his values, sticking to his guns, meaning he's not trying to be difficult. It's just, this is what I believe and I'm going to hold true to it, regardless of the outside pressure. And let's talk about the cost, because Chris has lost clients, right? Refusing misaligned work. He's told plenty of stories where he might have won the deal or the client, and he didn't, right? He's been criticized for being a little too blunt. I've listened to him many a times wondering like, oh, that was said very directly. Initially he's not the, most charming, but he's very to the heart. He speaks to me because of his sincerity and his direct way of speaking, because trust, man, it goes through the door. It goes through the window the moment that leaders trade truth for approval. You've felt it, you've seen it. And so what Chris does, what he shows us, is that authenticity isn't self-expression, even though you see much of it in the way that he dresses and the way that he shows up, but it's more self-respect. I respect myself first, and that's why I cannot do this injustice to me, to you, by taking on a project that is misaligned with what I do. He's very clear about saying, this is how I work, this is what I believe, and this is the standard I hold, even if it means walking away. I get it that might feel a little bit arrogant, but I really see that as authentic leadership. What does authentic leadership look like in real life? Well, here's a couple of things that I think might help answer that question. And it's teach what you practice. Right? Charge what you believe. Decide before you're pressured. I would tell my teenager, when she was growing up, it wasn't hey, if drugs ever come your way, are you going to make the decision on the spot to, snort cocaine or drink alcohol? Like, that decision that you had to have made that decision long before that moment ever presents itself. So decide what you will do when money is on the line, when your reputation is on the line. What will you do before you're pressured? Because you're going to have a board, you're going to have staff, you're going to have a million different people telling you to make decisions, and you might feel pressured to, again, be liked, and well, I got to do what people are telling me to do. But if you have made the decision ahead of time that you have certain values and lines you will not cross, then it just makes those decisions so much easier to make. Because really, people won't trust leaders who just say the right things, right? They're going to trust the leaders who live the same truth everywhere they show up. You know this if you're a parent. You cannot tell your children to do as I say, not as I do. That kind of hypocrisy just doesn't work. Kids are way too smart for that. And that's what brings me to when we think about really what the answer around authenticity is. What does it look like? I think it's being someone that you can trust, that others can trust. And that trust is built in the gaps, right? It's built when a decision is going to cost you something. Authenticity is what people see, but trust is what they feel. Authenticity goes beyond just who you say you are, but it's who people can count on you to be.